welcome along to another episode of the DP Coffee Hour. I'm your host, Neil, and today I am joined by two excellent guests for a conversation about robotics. First is Amar from Tashi Network, and welcome Amar, and also Harry from 375 AI, who we haven't had on the show before. Very big welcome to you, Harry. When I was trying to find a way earlier on to describe what your guys' projects are in terms of robotics in the future, the best thing that I could come up with was that Tashi is kind of like the nervous system. It's a real-time coordination layer for robots. Yeah, to allow the machines to sync actions and all that kind of stuff and function basically. And 375 is like the sensory inputs, right? The senses, I suppose. So the senses in the nervous system, which is quite apt for our conversation. I think if you guys agree with that or not, I don't know, but by all means, let me know. So just to kick things off, do you want to just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your backstory and like what you're working on right now. And Harry, maybe since you're new to the show, you could go first, and then Amar.
Sure. You'll have to. I've been in bed for what feels like a week because I've been frozen solid in North America. But I'm coming out the other side now. But pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Neil and Amar. Lovely to meet you. So I'm Harry Dewhurst, CEO and co-founder of 375 AI. Neil, you did a good job of kind of introducing what we do, and I'll come on to that in a moment. My background's been an entrepreneur for my whole career. I left school at 16 and started my first company when I was 20. That was a data platform for mobile operators that helped them understand and monetize their user bases. I sold that company for $320 million to Singtel and moved to Asia as part of that, and then built that business out within Singtel Group across Asia. Then went on to be president of another data business called Bliss, which is a company that understand where people go in the real world using digital signals. So from apps and so on and so forth. And from that, you can begin to start to understand that audience and that kind of group of people. We sold that business to T-Mobile in the US. And then before I started 375 AI, I kind of have a bit of a move, kind of shifted in kind of categories, but I became the CEO of Linksys, the Wi-Fi router company that's been around as long as I've been alive, and joined that in like the height of COVID. Had 1,000 employees, of which I'd met 5 for like over a year. So it was challenging to say the least. But it was there that I discovered Deepin, and helium got on my radar, obviously as a natural kind of thing that Linksys would be kind of adjacent to. So got kind of fascinated by it. And then 3.5 years ago, me and my now co-founder Rob, who worked with me at Linksys and was my business partner at Linksys, left to launch 375 AI. And yeah, 375 AI. And I'll stop rambling and let Amar speak. But it's the eyes and ears of the physical world. So whether that's for AI or robotics, it gives a view into what's actually happening right now, deterministically, versus just a guesstimate based on like survey or panel or extrapolation of other data sets and amalgamation of other data sets that might otherwise be the way that you would find out what's happening on Broadway and Canal in New York right now. But yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks, Neil.
Yeah, I wasn't sure where you were because when I was trying to, like, I always try to give people the times and things that the stream is going to be live on in their local time zone. And it's like my production, Carla, the lady who helps produce the show, is like, where is he? So I don't know, but I saw on his ex that he was in Bali recently, and he's got an English accent. And then there was stuff about the States. I'm fairly sure they're like deep in the States in terms of where you're collecting the data and stuff like that. So we weren't really sure. You're a bit of an international man of mystery.
I've been called that.
Glad to have you on the show. I know, Amara, you're based in Singapore, right?
That is correct. I am, and I recognize the Singtel name. So clearly you have a pretty storied past, Harry. Great to connect. I was going through different pages, and seems like you're on another Spaces with our CTO this week. So it feels like you're interacting with Tashi a lot. So it seems, some overlap with our lives. So good to be connected here, and happy to be back in the Deep in Coffee Hour. I don't remember the last topic of our chat, but it was with a great group of people, and I connected with them again. So kudos to you guys for having such a good quality production that you continue doing.
Thanks. It's a lot of work.
So, yeah, I can imagine. We've been posting our role the longest time. It's one of those things that's a list, but we've gotten down to exactly that, because you can't have these things. It's a lot. So definitely well done. So yeah, quick intro about me and Tashi. Been a startup guy for about 20 years. Started life in investments with an early stage fund. Was doing investment banking, VC investments. Did venture building with a fund as well. Then was with more late stage companies. Set up ops for Uber in Asia. Set up Grab's B2B business, and became an entrepreneur post that. So started a freelancer marketplace that scaled really well, and got into Web3 and found it super exciting. Ended up setting up a small fund, kind of scaling that out with friends, and that did fairly okay. And post that, I was like, wow, like this is super cool tech. It's not just about all the hype that people talk about. So in that process, I connected with my co-founders, and our vision was that, can we take some of this technology and solve real problems, so outside of what crypto is? And that's how we started Tashi. And the idea was, can we build like a parallel internet of sorts where everything can run without servers? We solved this problem in the gaming world to start with. Me and my co-founder are both been gamers for a long time, and that scaled well. And we were like, let's go explore what else is exciting out there, and started doing things in IoT and AI, and robotics like became a natural calling. So we were asked by Web3 folks to say, hey, can we kind of work with you in parallel? And we set up this foundation called Intercognitive along with Ayuki, Peak, GeoNet. And as we started going down the rabbit hole in the Web3 side of things, we like started looking at the Web2 part of robotics, which is essentially like 98% of the industry. And when we started speaking with them, they started telling us like, hey man, like we actually need this solution, right? We don't have something quite equivalent of what you guys do. This is super unique. How do we get this applied here? So we got connected with like larger players like SoftBank Robotics, to like some of the hardware players in China, to middleware and OS companies, and all those conversations were all super exciting. And we started figuring that this was a real problem we were solving, because imagine you have a Tesla robot and a Unitary robot, like how do they coordinate? And right now everyone's focused on making them individually autonomous, but you lose out a lot, because if one robot can share context with the other, that brings more collective intelligence, and there isn't something that exists towards what we do. And the only way to kind of pass over that data, and I think Harry, obviously with his expertise, will know more about this, is one of the biggest problems in the data industry is that everyone wants to own their own data sets, right? So a Tesla robot will never want to share that with a Unitary robot, right? So can you allow context sharing in a trustless environment? And that's where what we do is super interesting and exciting. Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you guys.
One of the joys of having a home office is that you've got neighbors who do things basically. And my neighbor is silent all week. You never hear anything. But then, for whatever reason, at this time on a Tuesday, he decides that's the time for home improvement. So, anyways, there was a banging there. Anyway, that's why I was on mute. Yeah, no, that's super interesting, Emma. And I think so. You said something there about nobody was focused on the Web 2 part of it. When you say that, what do you mean? Because I think, like Web 3 and Web 2, I think for a lot of people who might be watching, they would kind of struggle to understand what the difference is when you talk about that kind of side of things. Obviously, trustless is very important, but what do you mean when you say Web 2 in the context of your last comments?
Yeah, I think when essentially, like, when we put it back simply, right? Like, until blockchain became popular about, say, 10 years back, everything was Web 2. Blockchains came around and kind of started putting the Web 3 thing, which was this whole you own your data kind of stuff, which I think that, and we all expected them to all merge together at some point, but that merging hasn't happened. It's happening slowly in the finance world. So TradFi and DeFi are coming closer as a lot of the laws pass in the US and everything else. But if we think about the other deep tech industries in terms of architectures, the adoption of decentralized tech hasn't exploded the way people thought it would. There are very few projects which kind of sold the value props that they were talking about, and it's not gone the way people thought, right? And there's a few reasons, right? I can share one. So the two main reasons is, one, originally Web3 just didn't have the SLAs that everybody is used to, right, with the cloud companies. And that's one of the most critical things that you need. And two, even as we're building it, you realize that switching systems is always a human behavior problem, and it's significantly harder than people ever imagine, even if you create benefits for them. So the switching over mindset thing is kind of, people are moving past that, and it's more about how do you make the tech understood without any impact and switching, etc. Digressing from the question, but that's just to share context why it still exists. Now, in the context of robotics, if I had to think about the industry, we'd break it down to the hardware guys, which is, you have the popular humanoid manufacturers like Tesla and Unitary, and then you have the old school companies like ABB, Fanuc, who are all building non-humanoid robots. And then you have the middleware guys building operating systems, and then you have system integrators and deployment folks. This industry has been around for longer than people are aware and talk about in Web3. So this seems like, people think in Web3 like someone's woken up in the last 6 months and this is blown up. But robotics has been a massive industry that everyone has been looking at and investing in for a long time. My co-founder invested in a company in Singapore like in 2018 that just became profitable last year, right? So a lot of momentum is with Web3, with robotics, but it's been around for a long time. So that industry was entirely Web 2. Like Web 3 was not part of that ecosystem at all. And now I think in the last 1 year, Web 3 is now getting into the weeds of it and building solutions that can be beneficial for the larger robotics ecosystem. So that merging is just starting. It's very initial.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's interesting, like the Web3 thing in the context of robotics. Because I think, well, a lot of people for me, Web3 just means that you're connecting a payment. There's some sort of an interface between, payment systems where you own, you own the money, you own the keys, etc. And I agree. I think on the like at a Web2 level, where you've got TradFi and on all of their applications, it is definitely moving closer. When we talk about robotics and we talk about, how that works in a Web3 context, I think it gets very interesting, particularly with DePIN. And the reason I got into DePIN was because of this idea of, despite being a capitalist and believing in meritocracy, I like the idea of a better distribution of wealth, a more fair distribution of wealth than Jeff Bezos just getting to keep it all, basically. So I guess, maybe it would help if you kind of explain to people who are listening how what you're building can kind of benefit the masses rather than benefiting the Mag 7?
For sure. So
That's a
we're
question for either of you or both, or crack into it,
okay.
either of you.
Since I kicked off, otherwise I'll quickly go and then pass it on to Harry. I don't want to take up the whole show. So we kind of have two things in our tech, or like essentially what we bring to market that we're focused on. One is our proprietary consensus protocol called Vertex, which is very much an enterprise-focused solution where we allow robots to coordinate with each other. So think of scenarios where you have 50 robots in a warehouse. They can coordinate tasks with each other. Today we had a pretty interesting call with one of our old friends who's right now helping the Ukraine war effort for America. And, we were telling him about Tashi, and he's like, wow, I can use this for some of the robotic swarm infrastructure that we're thinking about. And we naturally just asked him about Anduril, and his comment was, it's just way too expensive. Like the money just doesn't reach the point where we can actually spend so much. So, it's not the use case we were thinking about, but it's crazy where you think that the number of things where technology is proliferating, robotics is scaling, and where this can apply is pretty massive. We have the second side to our business, which is a deepen, where we offer edge compute to these private mesh networks, which are running this consensus. So we have 50,000 community run nodes, so anyone can run it, even on a Raspberry Pi. It's a pretty straightforward process. You can go on deepen.tashi.network and either choose to run a node yourself, or we have NAS partners, which means you pay someone $1 a month or so to run the node on your behalf, and you earn Tashi points. That kind of completes the ecosystem for us. So this edge compute is closest to where these networks are formed. So if have a robotics factory, say in Singapore, then we'll find people running these edge Tashi nodes nearest to that factory and offer whatever compute services are required for that ecosystem. So that completes the loop and kind of makes us competitive with the larger cloud guys.
Okay. Harry?
Yeah, I mean, as I kind of said before, and Amar, you touched on something that we at 375 found particularly interesting, which is this concept of edge compute and far edge compute. And I think it really is kind of the evolution of how networks will evolve, from going from mainframes into cloud, and now cloud into edge and far edge, is going to be critical for the evolution of robotics. Amar, you also touched on something that I find fascinating, which is machine to machine communication and the sharing of a robot, whether it's your lawnmower or vacuum cleaner. It only has as much view as it has, and it is reliant solely on its own sensors. Same goes for a Tesla. Even Teslas don't talk to Teslas yet. There are protocols that have been and are being developed that enable car-to-car communication, and there are systems, GeoNet, for example, that create spatial awareness and hyper accurate on the ground RTK. So there is an evolution, and yes, robotics has been around for decades. It's getting far more mainstream, far more affordable, and but there's still a huge amount of maturity to come. And I believe that there is a lot of missing pieces, and data is going to be at the crux of at least one of them. And knowing what you don't know will be important for something that walks around your house, and right. or walks down the street, or does your shopping, or cooks your food. And their sensors alone won't be enough for it to really thrive. You'll get to a certain point, but you'll then need to go beyond that and have a view beyond your own vantage point, or the machine's vantage point, whatever sense that might be, or even robot that might be. So that's kind of, I guess, my 2 cents on where that the space is going, and where it will need to go in order to move into this physical AI world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, like you say, robotics has been around for a long time, but without AI getting to the point that it's kind of almost at, it's just not very useful. It's very limited in terms of what it can do. I've been playing around for about the last week with what's called OpenClaw now on a MacBook that I have here, and it's just fascinating the difference it can make when it can actually do stuff, like when you can use one of the models to actually do something for you. So with Opus 4.5, it's incredible how much stuff it can do and how quickly it can do it. I'd imagine loading that into some sort of a humanoid robot that could actually do stuff would be quite revolutionary, which is what Tesla, etc., are trying to do, obviously, with their stuff. I guess one of the things I wonder about is, like, traditionally, those types of actors have a very centralized view. Like you say, Teslas don't talk to other Teslas yet because they're not thinking decentralized like that. They're thinking we want to control everything from a single place. Is the world, is the future super dystopian without decentralized technology powering all of these robotic systems?
I mean, Amara, I'll kick it off if you don't, and then you can comment, and sure you'll have better comments than me. But I mean, certainly, there will be, and just like the dawn of the internet, or at least in the early days of the internet, AOL and things like that, and nets, these were walled gardens and black boxes, and they did that for their own defense, or it was their moat. And Tesla, probably more than likely, as a dominant force in the space, are gonna be quite proprietary. I think others around it will collaborate more because they're on the back foot. So there are alliances happening between the German car companies and GM and Ford and so on, that maybe become kind of a powerful way to move forward in the case of autonomous vehicles. The other side of robotics, which you haven't touched on, is aviation and drones and I'll touch on it briefly, but there's a whole amount of orchestration that needs to happen for that. Everyone's seen the YouTube videos of Amazon packages being dropped on your doorstep. I mean, I haven't had one dropped on my doorstep yet, and only
a matter of time, though, right?
When they're going to start firing them out of rockets, so they just land through your letterbox. Just
put little wings on them. Disposable
exactly.
drones.
But there's a huge amount that needs to happen again on the data layer for those things to scale and scale safely, and there needs to be standards, and the more that can be shared amongst machines, the better each of those machines will be as a byproduct of that. However, commercial realities and as you said, capitalistic realities will remain. We're not going into this just come by our mode of life. So it's definitely gonna not be without its challenges. I mean, pulling together huge companies, even with industry bodies and so on, either takes a lifetime or never works, or both. It's like one or the other.
Okay.
Yeah, it's so true. I think the word that Harry used there is spot on, which is, the world is driven by capitalistic opportunities. Even the countries which kind of fall under the definition of communism are pretty much all development there is very capitalistic. And when you think about that, it takes a lot of efficiency from in the humans to kind of come up with something and make it happen, right? And I think one of the differences that the average person doesn't think about, being non-tech oriented, is the difference between distributed systems and decentralized systems, right? So decentralized systems are also distributed, but essentially don't necessarily have separate set of power, right? You can have a lot of distributed systems which are all controlled by a single, company, etc. And so I think as we're moving to all these use cases, distributed systems will continue to scale. It'll just become critical because you'll need more edge compute, more edge data. One of the previous things that Harry was mentioning, we're seeing this live right now. We have a partner called Robotics, which wants to build the next 3 CPOs. And they were saying that it's so hard to do that. It's not because humanoids don't exist or AI models don't exist, but you just don't have data from someone's house, right? Like you don't have that actual stuff what an average person is doing, right? So, and it's different for each person. So until you start getting into everyone's house and collecting all that edge data, it becomes hard to have what exact inference needs to be done. So they started by building these comfort-focused robots that humans will easily buy and put them in. The endeavor for that is to collect the data as the first step, to move to the second step. And that's all part of distributed systems, right? You're collecting it and you can use it for multiple purposes and so on. The decentralization has a lot of merit, but in some way or other always being controlled by a smaller group. Even if you think about, blockchains, they're typically started by small groups of people who manage to control majority of the outcome of that, right? So it's not that I can't start a blockchain tomorrow and have like 1 million nodes around the world, but I won't be able to compete with Solana, right? And what differentiates Solana is not that they have more nodes or less nodes. It's because the team on the top has managed to create such a massive ecosystem, and you don't need a crazy number of nodes for that. They've created a massive financial behemoth, right? They've created that financial liquidity that's coming, right? And that's what it's hard to fight against, and that's where it's where decentralization as the thesis exists, but it's harder to execute as a reality.
Right, definitely, it's much more complex. However, I often joke on this show that I just probably watched too much sci-fi, especially when I was younger. And, so like my brain, when I think about the future, which I spend a lot of time thinking about these days, tends to veer towards like, what's the catastrophic, like dystopian view of everything in like, 10 years? Are we living in a world where there's like to use Harry's example, like Amazon drones flying here, there, and everywhere? The sky is just full of them, dropping parcels, doing whatever else, and flying robot taxis and regular taxis and robots walking around doing people's shopping. And if that is what it looks like in the future, what does that mean for the average person? Because like if all of those robotic devices are controlled by 4 companies or 7 companies, I can fairly quickly see how that could be just horrific from a privacy point of view, from your rights perspective. I mean, who's actually making any money from that? Am I the person making the money because I own the robot and it's doing stuff, or it's creating productivity gains? I guess the theme of the show was about when robots take over, who makes the money? And I just love to hear your guys' thoughts on like what that might look like. And if 375 is wildly successful, and if Tashi's wildly successful, does it mean anything at all for the average man, or are we still looking at a world where the vast majority of the
If you don't mind, I can go first. time. So I love sci-fi, uh, everything from Brave New World, whatever else, like everything that out there I've seen and read and so on. And you put it in dystopian future, utopian future, whichever one it is. There's always folks who are leading society or civilization or whatever the structure is, right? Because humans are built differently. This whole concept, everyone's the same, just doesn't exist. Because we all get wired a different way, right? Not everyone's ready to drop out of school at 16. Like, that's me giving credit to Harry here, but it's not. And that's accepting that as reality is, I think, one of the key things, right? And when you talk about this future, is it's not significantly different than today, right? Like, this whole data maximization by a handful of organizations is the world we live in right now, right? So, Web3 folks can come in and like try and sell this idea that make money from your own data, etc. But so I think two kind of paths to that, right? One is it's already happening. Civilization and society and humans have all accepted it very happily. They're like, you're giving me value for my time. I'm happy with this entertainment, all good. But if you look at it just mathematically as well, as an individual, like, what would I earn if I started charging for my data, right? Like a few dollars a month at max, because like these organizations make money because they can do this at scale, right? They're talking about getting hundreds of millions of people on their network, and that's how they monetize it. But one person's own data is not really worth much, right? Like, the human life in itself is worth a lot, but just that data in itself, like, if you go and tell me, hey man, like, you do this, and that's what Web3 is, like, you learn $5 from your data. Sure. Would that change our life in any way as an individual? Unlikely. And I think that's where the gap is, right? So people will only get out of their bed or whatever else where it actually changes their life, right? Can they do something else with it? So the few dollars help them think of it like reward points or whatever else. And I think that ecosystem already exists today. I think it'll just become easier. You'll have more integrations. Your robot will get you points, more integrations with other things where you think of like your airline miles and converting them. And, those, that world will proliferate quite easily where it'll just become more seamless. But if you think about the average person's life, I don't expect every person to wake up and say, hey man, I need to be paid for my life and like just for living. And I don't think that's just true. And even if you do, what do you get? Like, you can't make enough to live a life out of it.
And unless you're an Instagrammer.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe the robots could be like doing that
I had
slow
one post
TV
one
thing
day,
that's
like,
taking off.
there's three kinds of people. There's creators, curators, and consumers. 80% of the world, I think, is consumers, 15% are curators, and 5% are creators. So yeah, the creators are doing great. The curators still do fine. And it's the consumers that, get caught up in all the other stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, to further on that point, I mean, firstly, Neil, one thing that sprung to mind when we're talking about cars driving themselves, taxis driving themselves, packages coming into your mailbox, the biggest question I have is, why aren't there autonomous trains? Surely that must be the easiest one to solve. Doesn't have to turn a wheel, it just goes forwards and backwards. Like, that always puzzled me as to why you'd solve the cars before trains.
Well, Heathrow Airport has had autonomous trains for years. Like, I think.
I mean, sure, it goes
it's
a
in
mile.
a loop. Yeah, it's in a loop. Yeah. Back and forth. Yeah.
It's a monorail.
It's a solid point, though, when you consider how many times, especially in the UK, trains have crashed like into other trains because of the privatization, and they're not communicating with each other, being on the wrong tracks, etc.
Yeah, no, that one anyway. I'm digressing, but it always boggles my mind that we've been able to like have flying cars and flying boats before we've been able to have autonomous trains. So anyway, I'll leave that one with you. Yeah, I'm quite in terms of who's going to make the money. DeepIn as a concept, there's in the grand scheme of things, this is a very small community of people who even know that term. However, I believe it will be ingrained in society, whether you know it or like it or not. And I think, Amar, and most people will like it because people love air miles and people love Marriott points, and that's kind of somewhat like a reward mechanism for doing something. Now, sure, that's for spending money, but by contributing stuff to receive something back has this gratification, and it has a gamification, and I think human society responds well to that kind of circular
Incentives.
motion. And I've said this before, but like I can't wait until the word deepen isn't used anymore. It's just called like normal life, because everyone will contribute, and everyone already is. You know, just by using the internet for the last 20 years, you've been contributing your data. Now you've been getting ripped off, and you've become, you know, the product. And there's that kind of age-old saying of, you know, if something like along the lines of if the product is free, you are the product.
Yeah.
And so you know, people have been doing it, aware or unaware, for a very long time. I think now it is becoming a little more democratized, where businesses are kind of sharing in that, and sharing in the utilization of resource and energy and compute are really at the kind of highest bit order of necessity right now. You know, it used to be sugar and grain and rice and things like that. Like,
Right.
now it's CPU, GPU, and kilowatts.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Do you think this is just sort of kind of just to extend the question about deep? I mean, I agree with you that it's probably everything eventually moves closer together. But do you think, because I've seen some comments lately, Meltem Demwars, I think is her name, was saying that Deepin's dead and like doesn't make any sense. There's other people saying similar, and then you have the Deepin crew saying nonsense. It's just taking off. It's too early. What are your guys' thoughts on that whole topic? Do you think it's possible, basically, for wealth to be distributed through people contributing what they have?
I mean, I don't know whether it's necessarily like, it will be wealth for a certain number of people, but for the vast majority, it will just be subsidized. They'll get the
Right.
stuff that they need and want a little bit cheaper than they otherwise would if they didn't participate. So no, Deepin is not dead. Deepin is evolving, and as I say, it's probably evolving away from the word deepin because it's a terrible name. And it wasn't even called that a few, 2 years ago. It wasn't even called that. You had
So
DY,
sorry, it's
you
both.
had T-pin, you
Yeah.
had all kinds of words, and all of them were
Yeah.
rubbish. So it's just going to become normal, just the norm. And
Yeah.
you will contribute stuff, you will receive rewards, whether that is air miles or whether that is tokens or better life, because you've got all this utility and packages are being rocketed into your mailbox. Yeah, everyone will benefit from that. I mean, yes, the big players, Google, Facebook, Amazon, like they're gonna be dominant in many regards. But I think that there is a strong movement to non-proprietary. If we look at it from a software perspective, like moving from proprietary protocols into open source, like the whole tech ecosystem now runs on open source, and you then create proprietary things out of it. But it's going to need standards, and it's going to need layers at which the ecosystem can evolve, and no one company will solve that. And I think, frankly, companies like us and Tashi, like on our own, sure, nothing. But like, if we keep talking gibberish like this, we'll get there someday.
Yeah. Collaboration.
Yeah, I
Tashi,
actually wrote an article about 2 weeks back, literally, that was called "Deepin is Dead, Long Live Deepin." I just shared the link within our group chat
Yeah.
here. So, so coincidentally, we're talking about that right now, and it was with that same theme, right? Like, Deepin as the narrative within Web3, kind of obviously, which is just very much, speculators sitting there and looking at Deepin projects and saying, hey, Deepin tokens aren't doing well, AI tokens are doing well, now robotics tokens are going to do well. Like, that's kind of one ecosystem that you think about, right? So from that perspective, the idea was, yeah, sure, it's, not the folks that we're essentially just building our businesses for, right? We have the larger ecosystems, bigger problems that we're solving. And I think that's where I think long live Deepin is still key, where a lot of those best practices are coming together, where people are understanding that how does supply and demand come together, right? So a lot of folks thought that using a token to bootstrap supply was the end game, which it never is, right? Like, just having supply doesn't build a business. You need meaningful demand at the end of it, and that takes time, right? If you think about any ecosystem which has a two-sided marketplace, it takes time to build those out in a scalable, sustainable manner. And everyone that's in this world, we're kind of partners with a lot of the folks, and in the compute side, storage side, and all the older, I say, Helium, etc. They're all doing really well as in terms of the business itself, right? It's because they've now focused on the demand side of things, and you just think about it from that perspective, and you delineate the direct correlation with the token price, right? Which is obviously more linked to how the token market does, linked to other micro factors. Then your view changes completely. There was a window where everyone was like, you just got to do buybacks and burns. And I was reading Hivelo's latest announcements too, and you guys seem to be saying the same thing, which is we're focusing on what's the demand metrics, right? And when you think about demand metrics, that's essentially who cares about it, because I think we've done a great job in Web3 in building supply and having all these different things in place. But where we really scale this out is when the demand comes in, the businesses become sustainable, and things start blowing up. And that's what I think next phase is all about, which we're quite excited for.
Yeah, agreed. I think that was part of the problem for Havelo, was around the demand side. Just wasn't enough demand for the resources being provided. So it's very hard to get users some sort of an ROI. The value prop, or the sort of product market fit, I suppose you could call it, for the Havelo Deepin app was always to try and get the average user to $10 a month. And yeah, there's a number of reasons why that was kind of a premise that didn't happen in 2025. But part of it is to do with like the demand side that you mentioned, and obviously part of it has to do with types of technology that everybody had to contribute, and the direction that things have gone. Like, there's a lot of, I think, where the money is at the moment, or seems to be, is in the really high end powerful GPU side of things. So when you've got a very high horsepower GPU to bridge the party, then you can make, it's obviously you're getting all the preferential treatment by the various networks, particularly the ones that Havelo integrated with. So yeah, just for the time being, the decision there was made that it would be put on the shelf I think temporarily. I hope temporarily. I think everybody in Havelo, just, this is my personal opinion, but certainly it's been the vibe that everybody believes very strongly in Deepin as a concept, and not just as a concept, but just as a necessity for humanity in long term. it's much better to have a more decentralized, just have decentralized hardware. I mean, one example is look at all the AWS outages. You imagine all your robots are powered by AWS and it goes out for a day, and your city's just littered with robots that are standing there because they don't know what to do because they don't have access to the data that they need to figure out how to get home or whatever. So you guys doing a decentralized infra for that, maybe that means that somebody's robot gets home in time.
100%. That's exactly what we're doing.
There you go.
Home in time for dinner.
Home in time to cook the dinner, or maybe save a life. Maybe some old fella's on the floor of his gaff after having a heart attack, and if that AWS outage hadn't happened, the robot would have got back in time to save his life. I don't know. It's just ridiculous, obviously, but
I mean, on like cloud and AWS, it's really not cloud. It's 10 places that are massive, and that's like these outages expose that vulnerability. That's why the edge and far edge are so important to the evolution of networking, because it's just so inefficient, and the use cases, particularly in robotics, just don't lend themselves to cloud infrastructure. Like the speed of light problem, which is the problem, the latency between point A to point B. You can't go from Taiwan to Singapore, which is where AWS's data center is, or one of them in Asia. You can't go from Boston to New York even, or Houston, or wherever the other mega centers are. And that, whilst it seems like a tiny fragment, is going to be the difference between success. And there's a bunch of projects even in the DeepIn space, 00, they're building like pipelines and deep sea cables and stuff to connect Solana stuff closer together, to just shave off fractions of a second, 5 milliseconds, but that will make a huge difference. And banking and finance have done that for years in algorithmic trading, and
right.
They've built their offices right next door to the exchange just for that reason. Like
to get that millisecond on the transaction.
Then you've got the edge. You have the edge, and
right.
So there's a hell of a lot of evolution that's coming in the architecture of networking as we know it, and that's why DeepIn becomes incredibly relevant, because everyone becomes a node. You don't have 10 data centers, you have 10 billion data centers.
As long as you don't have 10 billion attack vectors.
Well, no, actors. I mean, you'd have to attack 10 billion things. It actually makes it better, because it's far more resilient when if you've suddenly only got 99 billion things, or 9 billion things versus 10, you're still fine. But right now, the cloud is extremely centralized.
Yeah. You're right.
We started life building this in gaming, which is a very latency sensitive industry. You can imagine nobody likes you drop off a game in a second if you had a momentary glitch. Like, I had a glitch over here and people are like, yeah, fine, I'll take a second, wait to hear Amar out. But if you're playing a multiplayer game and you get a glitch, you're like, this is it, right? So we have partners at Call of Duty who would tell us that, they could make, the head of Call of Duty could make any changes other than, even if it impacted 1 millisecond in the game's latency. in which case the decision would go to the board of directors. You can imagine that, because that's how sensitive it could be, because 1 millisecond could impact the entire earnings of the game. And I think that's being battle tested in that environment. It gives us confidence that we're moving into a world where every millisecond counts, right? So, because what we're doing right now with robots is, again, 2-3 milliseconds here or there is fine. But when you move into autonomous vehicles, which is kind of what we would like to in, say, the next year or two, over there you can't. You have to be sub 5 to 10 milliseconds. So anything more than that is too slow when you think about decision making that these cars will make on the road. So it's definitely, the world is getting more on the edge, more faster, more closer, and the systems are catching up to that.
Yeah, I mean, having cars crashing because
why talk to a data center that's 600 miles away when you could talk to one 6 miles away or 600 feet away? And that's really there's a long way to go in that, but that's the future. But it's a very, I mean, in some respects, the big players in the space, whether that's Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, like, they almost don't want it to happen, because it's not going to be them that wins that race, because they're not going to set up 10,000 data centers, because it's just not in their rhythm. Like, they're used to doing these monstrous.
It's inefficient.
It's very. It's inefficient for anyone who's creating it, unless it's thousands of people creating it individually, and that's why, like, this deepin thing makes sense.
Right. Amar, what's going on with Hitachi this year in 2026? Why don't you just give us a little taste of what you guys have in store for the world, and I'll ask you the same question afterwards. Sorry.
Sure. This year is definitely super exciting. We just closed our pre-seed round recently, which was a small round, so we'll kick off the next one quite soon. Plus, we'll have TG in the coming months as market conditions improve. We have 50,000 plus community run nodes. They're accelerating at almost 10,000 new nodes every 2 weeks. So it's good to kind of have go live around that, and that ecosystem is ready. But I think the more than anything, we're excited about getting all the use cases we're exploring right now in the robotics space live. So I think I shared a few, like this Ukraine war one is pretty wild to us. It'll be interesting to see how we kind of perform in that kind of an environment. We're working with Singularity Net. They have a space called Digiverse in Turkey, where they have tons of humanoids running around. They want to use Tashi for exactly that purpose. You walk in and they're like, "Hey, Neil," and then that first robot chats with you, and then by the time you make it to the second robot, right now the second robot would start again, right, with "Hi, Neil," and that shouldn't be the case, right? It should be the second robot should know what the first robot said. Like, you walked in and be like, "Hey, I'm interested in ABC." So by the time you get to robot 2, he's like, "Yo, you were interested in this, so that's in this path," right? So that should also go live soon, and a couple of other interesting ones where it's like coordination for multi-vendor robots in warehouses and hospitals. So as those pop up, we're quite excited to explore the possibilities of what our tech that we built can actually achieve in solving real world problems, and that's what we're looking forward for everyone to look out for.
Cool. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it's just endless possibilities, I guess, use case applications and stuff like that. Just before we move on to you, Harry, someone asked, do you believe Hitachi might speed up AI doomsday scenario by giving machines the ability to communicate with each other? Silly question, but
I mean, it's already happening out there, right? So what started as Claude bot became more bot, and now OpenClaw, right? Just see the AI agent communication. So I don't think we're involved in the world of accelerating AI models, which is kind of where I think the next step, where some of these things will be there. We're essentially, we're all about safety first. I think to what Harry said is how we look at things. Having 10 billion nodes means that you need 10 billion safety points, because that's how the Tashi network works. Is that anyone that's a node is actually acting as a barrier, because it becomes significantly harder to crack that consensus. So you need 2/3 of people to agree to a certain state, right? So you need more than 1/3 to be bad actors. So in our case, we're kind of more focused on helping a world where it's going to be harder to crack security as these machines become more and more autonomous.
Sweet. I'm definitely excited to see what you guys get up to this year, and we'll have to have you back on the show later on in the year when you get closer to some of those milestones, let's say, or after them. Harry, what's going on with 375 this year? What are you excited about?
I'm excited about not being in bed anymore, because I've finally unfrozen from this Arctic wave. But yeah, 375. We TGE late part last year after concluding our test net. We've got a couple of 100,000 users of our mobile app. We've rolled out our Edge 375 Edge device, which is a very powerful sensor with 6 cameras and local NVIDIA GPU, and does all the kind of computer vision technology at the edge without sending it into the cloud. And the reason for that is one, efficiency, and two, data privacy. It means that we're converting what would be a terabyte of high definition video streams into 20-30 megabytes of just raw data in text form, and we kind of extract and train the models as to what we think's useful and needed, but they can be trained and retrained and changed over time. So we're going to have continued network expansion. We have some exciting updates coming into the app, which will enable our community to generate greater rewards by being, as it stood right now, our app is quite a kind of passive sensor, and it is collecting valuable data, but you're not really having to do anything. We're now going to gamify and kind of create missions and so on, whereby you use the sensors of your phone more proactively to generate revenues for us, and therefore increase rewards for you. And both you, Neil, and Amar, you touched on, like, driving revenue. I'm from what Amar would call Web 2. I just call it like normal business, and like that's what I know how to do. So we're just applying normal business logic in a next generation or next evolution of economy. And yeah, I think that that will be the thing that kind of helps the industry grow up a little and move away from Fartcoin.
Well, I mean, that would certainly be a welcome development. No offense to any Fartcoin bag holders listening, but yeah, I definitely think, yeah, it would be good. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense actually if you gamify things. I was just thinking when you were talking there, Harry, about how people whip out their phone at the first sign of anything that they might want to record a video of. Like, I don't know, my I don't know why, but my Instagram feed at the moment is just ice videos of ice apparently doing horrible things. So I don't know why that's the case, but that's what Instagram thinks I need to see for some reason, despite me not living in the US. Yeah. So again, people very, 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 very quick to whip out their phones and do something. If you can whip out your phone and do something that earns you, you're taking a picture of something that's useful for a network to know what's happening.
That's the idea for the next deep in business. How do you collect more on the ground data that you can send to folks and say, hey, I stopped doing that kind of stuff? Maybe for the next Deep in Happy Hour, call a few folks.
Monetize it.
That
Yeah.
too.
Right. Well, that's definitely an idea. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to tell people where they can follow your project or where they can follow you on X? And then we'll wrap up.
For sure. We are at Tashi Protocol on X. Please follow us, check us out. You'd find us on some of the links. I think we would have been posted at the Deep in Coffee Hour. Most of our updates are their best place to track us. We are active on Discord, Telegram, all the other usual channels, but X is the most active.
All right.
And yeah, we're on Discord and on X 375AI _. And I'm Harry Dewhurst on X. And then, yeah, 375.ai is our website, and you can find our apps, 375 Go, in Google Play and the App Store.
One quick question before we hop. I've been curious ever since I heard of you guys, Harry. Why 375?
375, good question. And I mean, so 375 is Highway 375 is the extraterrestrial highway that runs through Nevada, through Area 51. So it was a kind of little bit of a play on this kind of into the future alien world. You know, the stuff we're deploying is on highways, and we could get the domain. That's basically it.
Right.
Cool. Love it.
So it wasn't a case of you just going like this, pressing.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, that's our brand.
It would
375.
have come out. It would have come out even better.
All right, gents, thank you so much for joining me today. And,
Thanks, Neil.
A huge thank you to all of you tuned in to listen for another week of chat on tech and the future and robots, and in this case. Yeah, that's it for us today. Until next week, when we will be back, be kind to each other out there.